Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So first of all, Monica and Will, thank you very much for being part of this project, and also Will for inviting us to your place here and this beautiful place in Vallican. So I have a few questions to ask, and I'll get started with the first one here. And really, so it's to Monica, really, this first one initially here. Are you able to describe the push and pull factors that brought you and your family to Slocan Valley?
Push and pull factors. Interesting. That's an interesting term. I think my family wanted to move out of the city. I mean, there was definitely this urge to go back to the land, to leave what, the city structure and lifestyle, and feeling that we needed to be more self-sufficient. And my father was also connected and interested in the peace movements, the Doukhobors and the Quakers. He had been military during the Second World War, came from a military family, but left after the war, left the horrors of that, and definitely believed in communication and peaceful ways of conflict resolution. And he'd been teaching at the university, and they wanted to move out to the country. Push and pull. I don't know whether, there was. I don't think my mom looked back. I think for her, like coming here, she found community in a way that she never had had before. And yeah, I don't know.
Was there anything in particular about the Slocan Valley that attracted your family here?
It was green. It was a very hot summer, and we came out. We were in Grand Forks at a Doukhobor Peace Conference, and then we went camping as a family, and we drove up the Slocan Valley, and it was exquisitely beautiful and green. And we just had wonderful connections and meeting, and we saw David Orcutt, who was the father of a couple of friends that I had had in Vancouver at No Place at the student started alternative school there. And then there were other friends up in New Denver that we saw. I don't know, just it felt right, I think. It's hard to say because that all happened when I was 17. So my parents would have made more of that decision, and yeah.
Well, great. Sort of a general question here, but what sort of aspects of the counterculture movement in the Kootenays were you part of?
Aspects. Chop wood, carry water, outhouses, lived in this cabin before there was electricity, worked in the garden with, my skirt and no shirt on, so not feeling, yeah, I don't know. I think there's probably pictures of me building on my mom's house similarly, so, 17, 18, young, alive. So swimming naked in the river, and yeah, there was a lot of music. Just learning all the different things that it had to do with, preparing gardens, but then also preparing and saving food, and making apple juice and all of that. Yeah.
I've heard stories of the first year in this house. There was more people than before. It was several couples,
Yes.
and then when you got pregnant with me, I think some of the other families moved on and found other places, as was probably a good time because land was cheaper back then, and so people needed to
do
expand
that
as well.
Yes. Well, initially, I mean, my parents decided to buy the land with one of the teachers from the alternative school that I had been at in Vancouver, him and his partner, so Rob Wood and Jan Fraser, and they were with another friends of theirs, Margot and Blake. They got to renovate this cabin into a house. The deal was whoever house sold first in Vancouver was the one that was going to get the house on the property, and the other one was going to have to start building. And it all went down within a few days of that. But anyways, Jan and Rob got this house, and that's where I met Margot and Blake here too. And they opened the cabin out. There were 4 rooms there when we were first here. And then Jan and Margot and their kids were living up in Silverton renting. And then they came back down. They'd come down Christmas time. They didn't want to stay separate. So, and they had closed off the top cabin. So I don't know if you've seen it upstairs there. I mean, this is I don't know, the cabin is what, 20 by 20 or something. And so up there, it was wall-to-wall beds, a big sort of patchwork quilt of 6 adults and 6 kids, and kind of like a pajama party probably, or not. And downstairs the wood cook stove and a tin wash basin for washing. But we had great food and parties and music, and yeah, it was amazing actually. And then we moved out and camped on the island and out in the cabin there. And then, I don't know, Blake and Margot moved away that fall, and then Boris and I did too. And it wasn't, I think we were away for a year or 2, then came back in, actually it must have been 1973 we came back, 72, 73, so. But we were initially there 70, 71, so away for a year and then back. And by then the others weren't here, and Blake and I came back and lived here. Sorry, that's a bit of a ramble.
And you must have been enamored with the area.
Yes, yes, loved the place. And my mom was here. They were building a house here, and my mom and my younger brothers and sister were here, and loved the community, had friends, and yeah, didn't want to live in Vancouver in the scene there. So yeah, came back very much.
There must have been challenges though coming here, trying to establish yourself, your family, trying to establish yourself here, and building properties, things like that. What sort of challenges do you remember from those days?
Kind of challenges. The water freezing. The water freezing in the winter, and until we got the water line properly dug in, it freezing and then unthawing and doing that. And when I had a young baby, and we're doing diapers and a rigger washing machine, and you're hauling water, and yeah, that was a little challenging. And an outhouse was a little challenging too in the winter. The mosquitoes were challenging, but the rest, the work of it, the wood, the hauling wood, there was lots of great times, like, we wouldn't, we'd bring our groceries in on the toboggan, take even the laundry out, and then we'd put the kids on the toboggan and Blake would pull us all down, and we'd come all the way down the driveway with everything. Yeah, lots of, great times and being here. And
I think I remember losing a pound of butter one time on having to go and find it in the snowbank after that had fallen out of the toboggan.
The toboggan run down, yes, definitely. Yeah. And, and just even it was all very wild up against the edges here. Like you're seeing here, Will has done so much clearing it back. But like there was this little kind of handkerchief here in front of the house and the garden. And so the wildlife was really pretty close, and there were lots of bears around, and I remember one fall when the kids were little that there was a bear in the yard every day, you know, and I would come out and be chasing the bear off with my frying pans. You've seen our old frying pans that are here, and I'm banging and chasing them, and it would sort of look at me and not be that serious, take it that seriously. And so, yeah, that was a little more challenging, meeting bears and talking to the bears. Yeah.
But you had to learn lots of different skills when you came here, with the garden, things like that. Could you talk about?
Definitely learning from the garden. The Doukhobor neighbor, Nick Verrigan, used to come over and tell me different things about what I should do in the garden. So, and lots of reading and, you know, studying about it. And, you know, we had had gardens before, but I certainly hadn't cooked on well, I hadn't done that much cooking at home, probably because I had two older sisters. But I definitely learned to cook on a wood cook stove, which I still is one of my favorite ways to cook. It's lovely. But it's, yeah, it has its own challenges of an art of doing that. Yeah. So lots of things to learn how to do. We would make our own apple juice. My brothers made a one with saw blades and a chute, and we would, do that and preserve the apple juice. That was really fun. It was always a special thing in the fall to do. Liquid gold, we'd call it, when it would come pouring down, squishing it out. And yeah.
What sort of things did you grow here?
Oh, all, you know, all the classics, you know, potatoes, carrots, beets, you know, peas, beans, lettuce, tomatoes, squash, pumpkins. I never was big on the cucumbers or anything that you had to really start early. Black currants, rhubarb, strawberries, raspberries, and we had lots of apples and apple orchard and plums and all of that, for sure.
Squash and pumpkins.
Definitely squash and pumpkins.
I remember as a kid getting involved too, and I would get my own patch and my own things to be responsible for. Sometimes radishes, sometimes pumpkins. You know,
yeah.
It's good to get the kids putting their energy on something.
You and Diana, your sister, you also would do these when you'd find a dead animal or a dead bird. We had a kind of cemetery area where you would bury, birds would get buried, and there would be little ceremonies for them.
I remember one time I found a seed pod, and my cousin and I went and made a little garden in the middle of the bushes up near our grandmother's house, and it was just absolutely amazing. Like, all these flowers came out. We had collected this pod somewhere. We didn't really have any idea what kind of seeds it was, but it actually turned out really beautiful. And
Yes.
DC, our grandmother, honored that little garden and kept it off in the bushes for many years. It was quite cute. So I think the kids did their own gardening spontaneously. It was sort of like one of those, it was
Absolutely.
just a thing. You know, it was like we garden.
Yeah, and I think you started building, forts even way back then. Like, you were 5 when we looked after a friend's son who was 10 when she went off to Italy to study pottery, and Tristan lived with us for that winter and built a fort in the back just behind the house, and you guys worked on that fort together, and then we skated on the river together, and yeah, there's different there's classic poem of Blake's about in that. Yeah. But I certainly learned all the different things, like how to, run a skill saw and a chop saw and build and make carpentry. And I would say that, Will's dad, my partner Blake, was, as definitely as strong a male feminist as around there, and, wanted to see us make sure that the roles weren't kept strict, so that if it was my car that needed fixing, then he would show me how to do the brakes or how to change the tires and I did a transmission in my truck, and before we moved to Vancouver and all of that. Sometimes I would feel a little like, oh, you know what? I don't know if I always wanted to, but I am really, really grateful for it. And, learned to really love that and valued my friendships with the guys that I, call my mechanic teachers over the years. And yeah, it was good. And yeah, so a lot of shared pieces. Yeah.
Do you think sort of feminist movement was at play here?
Oh, definitely. Absolutely. And, we took years kind of who was going to be primary with the kids and who was going to be working and that. But after a while when he wanted to do that for the first year, then that became something more that because he was a writer, it was, he liked being at home with the kids, and I did well out in the world working, so that was a good balance for us. Yeah.
I also think at that time, TC, your mother, sort of blossomed as a person as well, and was one of the only older people of sort of the next generation that was a part of that movement. And so a lot of the young people saw her as a huge resource at that time. And she got involved just organizing people and having meetings and simple talkings, and got inspired by the Quaker circles and things. And I think started just talking and had a group of other, mostly women, who would have been around here at one point and started planning things and would have been key involved in the creation of the Vallican Whole and the cemetery and different things like that. But she sort of came into that role here. So it wasn't like she came with that power so much as she was welcomed, and people saw that in her, and they sort of helped pull it out of her as well. They wanted her help. They came over to her house. She made tea. The meetings would sort of happen. So I think we had, and I had a great example of that, both my mother and my grandmother, and a lot of these powerful women in the neighborhood who wrote grants and got funding and planned and made things happen. And so there was a certain sense of, women being very powerful in terms of starting this community and learning the new skills and putting things forward and interfacing with the public.
I think that's very true. It's a very good point there, Will, because for my mom, she was a professor's wife before that, and she didn't have a lot of friends, a few good friends each of the places we lived before, but then she came here and, was part of this community. And, there was, I know Corky talks about the time when there was a bunch of people around at her place out there, and people were, upset with what was happening for the kids in school at Winlaw. And she just sort of said, well, then we should start our own school. And, that hadn't occurred, or maybe it had occurred to others, but the way the story's being told, it was sort of like, well, it was just sort of matter of fact. It wasn't like, oh, a big deal that here we would do that. But we had been in Vancouver, where I'd been part of the first student-started free alternative high school. And then my younger brother, Jeremy, hadn't been very happy with the bullying that was going on at his school, and they'd created a school that was called the Floating School, out of Simon Fraser and some of the students from Simon Fraser. And then so we'd just started doing these alternative ways of learning and education, and so that seemed a pretty natural thing to move to doing that up here. Definitely, yeah. And so that's been an ongoing piece. So, that was the beginning of the whole school that was starting, not at the whole, but starting just as a school that happened in different people's houses for one day a week. Someone would host, and they would put on the classes that were happening there, and all the kids would go there, and then another day a week it would be somewhere else. And that was during that time. I had a day a week that was here, and I would do art with them in the afternoons, and that's maybe even where you remember some of the early boutiques and stuff. But in the morning, Catherine Marion, who was part of Theatre Energy, she would do theatre with them here, and we have a big living room there, and so there would be theatre, and then we would have lunch, and then we'd do art, and that was kind of, a whole year of that before the whole was ready to be used as a school space. Yeah.
It's neat. Thinking back, I think there was a sort of a sense that people could and should do anything, that sort of like that there wasn't anything that was beyond anybody's skill level, that there wasn't anything that was beyond our ability to figure out. We had people coming in and showing us how to make films and cut the tape and, taping it back together and really basic stuff, but also candles and, also, all kinds of different things. But I think that was sort of an empowering feeling that was around at that time, was that people could do anything, and perhaps they should, and because you could do it, that was sort of a powerful impetus to say that somebody in your community should be doing it, or you should at least have exposure to it and what that was. So it was sort of there was an inspiring energy about it, that sense of people just exploring and doing things, and a boundless sense of people's ability to learn, and it was like, oh, you're going to do this, oh, that's great, and this is so-and-so's going to be doing that, and good, you're doing art, it was just sort of when I think about like now, that it's very easy for people to not encourage, or to think that it's not good to do everything. But there was a time when it was like doing everything was special, like making your bread, getting your butter, all of that was just sort of that was the best thing you could do.
Yeah, making cheese, making yogurt, doing all of the different things for sure. And it was, everything of learning how to do it. Neither of us knew, Blake didn't know how to build a house or do any of that. We were all just learning from the ground up and from each other. Maybe my father knew some things and would come and show some things, but no. And my brother at 13 had been apprenticed to an architect, so he knew some more things. But Blake's would say, the only difference between you and me is that you think you'll call me if you can't do it. But I don't have somebody else to call. So I just have to figure out how to do it. So, you might as well figure out how to do it too. So it just became exactly that, like of just, no, we can actually do this. So, it's a sidetrack there, but I had recently one of my graduates, she's setting up her art therapy studio, and she asked about where I had gotten the tables for the Kootenay Art Therapy Institute, and I said, well, we'd made them. My brother had helped me then at that point, and then Blake had helped with different things, and they're good one-side plywood with folding tables screwed on the bottom, and then varathaned, and it's like you just would do and make. If you needed it, you would do and make, and that's. Yeah. So that we'd make wine, we'd make, I noticed you had dandelions actually out in the back here now, and it's like, oh, we were talking about doing that again this year, maybe, who knows, but yeah. Hello, little.
Probably doesn't help the shot.
That's okay.
Was spiritualism important in your life, in terms of
Buddhism, did you say that?
spiritualism?
Spiritualism.
Yeah. Was that something that you were practicing heavily here, or was that part of your culture here, or what was that?
I think there was a. It's a good question. But I wouldn't say that it was spiritualism, but it was in terms of there being kind of a more existential perspective on life, and very much a nature-based, way of living metaphorically in right relations. Certainly, we read and, the Chinese and the Buddhists, and we read, the Uspensky and Gurdjieff, and we were, other spiritual practitioners, Buddhist practitioners. We studied and thought about it all, but it wasn't like a dogma or a religion. It was a way of kind of being in right relationships with nature and with other people, and what does being a good person mean, and what does it mean to be in right connection to community. Definitely very much about strong values, morals and ethics, and community-based, family-based, community-based.
Nonviolent.
Yeah. Absolutely nonviolent.
And sort of, that there was extending to little bits of environmentalism as well, in the people very passionate about not spraying the railway with poison and things, and because of the people that harvested food along the railway and different things like that. So I remember, as you say, very much more communal, like respect for other religions, respect for other people, respect for other ways of being was almost, so it was almost more of a universal religion in that way, or spirituality of goodness and communication, and how to communicate and how to work as a group and as a community and show respect for each other, because there were different religions at that time. I think there were, people with Christian faiths and people, with Jewish traditions and different, so there were, and people who were Buddhist traditions, so there was definitely a lot of just sort of acceptance and mutual acceptance of people coming together, and also needing to heal their own trauma from their spiritual path of the past. So I think it was a lot of people like repairing the spiritualism that they'd had, because some people had had damaging spiritual experiences as well, and so that then they're trying to salvage what it was that felt good, or they're, and so that there was a lot of just sort of coming and going around that, I think, and giving space for that, because some people needed to repair those beliefs and other people not as much, and I remember very much, and around sexuality and things like that, there were people, lesbians and gay people, and I sort of remember also asking about that and being like, well, yeah, maybe, and whatever, and it's also not our business, or just different ways of thinking and talking about that.
Acceptance and respect, being very fundamental about that, for sure. I think in the different cultural, acceptance and support when the Sinaiacs were coming back. So very supportive of that process. And, my father, I think probably more particularly my father, Brian Carpendale, when we were in Ontario, being friends and related to people that were involved in the Quaker belief structures, and then that was from Argenta over here, and so that the Quaker process of sitting in circle and not speaking till you felt moved to speak was something that was, I would say, probably embedded in my family culture more than as a way of being, and that became the way that we held space when somebody died. It wasn't so much about having a wake, but we would have a circle, and people would speak when they felt moved to speak. And that's still something that the way I would hold it now, not as a more Indigenous style talking circle, but in a Quaker style circle. And that, when I think about it, that's probably really kind of rooted from my father years and years ago. Yeah.
Okay. Now the Slocan Valley is in that period has been associated with the cannabis industry, and did you have much dealings with drugs and that sort of aspect that was going on in the Kootenays of that period?
I don't don't know so much dealings. I mean, that was certainly one of the, you know, like it was a potential cash crop around here, you know, but there was a lot of people that were more big time into that kind of way of being. But it, you know, did we grow some? Yeah. Did you freak out if the helicopters came? Yeah. Did we burn some? Yeah. Did we smoke much? No. Not ever, really. And certainly, you know, like, yeah, some, maybe when I was younger, but no, not really. So, yeah. But there was lots of things happening in the scenes around here that, yeah, I didn't particularly want to get connected into. There was ways of being and styles and levels of it that were a little over the top. But you have probably other thoughts and experiences later on.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think there was sort of an intellectual side to the Slocan Valley, and then there was also a free love kind of side, and that some people would existed on both sides of that, and some people were more on one side or the other. You know, but that somehow that there is a bit of a crossover in that sort of needing to respect each other, and that open respect for what other people were doing was still important and allowed that to happen in a certain way. I think it got more awkward at certain points when when those cultures started to separate, you know, and so in some sense, as people started to feel more shame or become more isolated in one aspect, or in the drug culture aspect of that, they came to contribute less to the community in a certain way, and felt more isolated, and then that sort of spurred more separation, you know, in certain ways, whereas I think at one point those groups were the same.
Yes.
And then there was slight separation, you know, and some people going to Mexico and buying summer homes, and other people putting everything they have into the community and being really open about what they're doing. And so some of that bred more negativity, but you know, I think it's always been there, and it's like there's different cash crops, there's forestry, there's truck driving, you know, there's different ways that people make money, logging, and all of them feel some guilt over it, you know, and different things, and are made to feel guilt over how that interaction happens.
But there certainly was, I don't know, I remember at one point kind of thinking, well, you didn't necessarily ask people what did they do, you know, that people did the unmentionables, you know, like it wasn't like, you know, now I would kind of be curious, well, what are you passionate about? What do you do? And, but that, there were, you know, it wasn't talked about outside of the group where they were involved with. And so there was more, yeah, whether people were big time, people were more paranoid. There was paranoia, and there was differences in terms of how people, you know, finances were there. And yeah, I think it's a very good point you're making about that division of where people were involved in community and being active in some other way, and whether people or were more, yeah, isolationist.
And the isolation is actually became the most negative about it.
Yeah.
If you could do that openly, then it was sort of more celebrated and okay.
Yes.
You know, if you could be in the community and do that. There still is a lot less money in this community. You know, like even since legalization, a lot of people will talk about more jobs and things. But as far as, from my perception, there's less jobs and less money, and that it used to be a much bigger industry. And so we're in a major time of transition, which is just really interesting as well, like as all times of transition are. But that this community, you know, became secretive and was not supporting itself enough. And so that in some sense, it's a blessing to have things change again and have things brought out into the open.
Fantastic. And talked a bit about this, so I'm going to move on with it. But do you have connections with intentional communities outside of the counterculture movement? Which a little bit about the Quakers, the Duckapores? What sort of connections did you and your family have to the community?
I mean, we had, yeah, I mean, friendships and relationships. And one of my younger brothers went to the Argenta Friends School for after having been, doing kind of homeschooling and alternative schooling, and went and did that for grade 11 and 12. And so that was definitely a connections there. Yeah, I mean, we had definitely, friends and new people in the various intentional communities that were here. The Flying Hearts family, Harmony Gates, the New family, there were different communities that were around. But I don't know, we weren't as big socially there. The intentional pieces probably were more being connected with people through Theatre Energy, being connected with people through the Vallican Whole, being connected with people through the Dumont Creek Burial Society, and then through the university and the David Thompson University, and sort of so other intellectual and the poetry scene, and the performance scene because of Blake's work, the arts community through my own art, but then definitely Blake's father once he was here. And, he was a watercolor painter, and so definitely connected to the art scene. So yeah, those kind of scenes. But I don't know, we were kind of here on the land.
I think you're right. You're right to say the arts community, because that is,
Yeah.
It's a bigger community, and it's one that branched out went as far as Vancouver and bits in Toronto.
Yeah.
That was very much what you guys would have been a part of, an intellectual, artistic community. I think I found the environmental movement, myself, and in some way, and some neat things out in Halifax that really identified and brought back to that rural skills sort of stuff, and a lot of it just cycling back about like needing to learn skills and needing to learn how to belong as an animal on the planet. And so some of that is the sort of, we find other groups that reach beyond. But I think our family was more about reaching out and growing the group rather than creating a small group and working endlessly within that. Was sort of about growing connections.
About growing connections and about community. I mean, you're absolutely right about the environmental piece, but it was, about school or about, well, what's needed here in this community, and then responding to that. And that's, that was certainly, my mom for sure, TC, and her involvement here.
And you started in the art therapy school.
Yes, which I wouldn't have if somebody hadn't asked, basically. They wanted to train. And, I wasn't like I came in with an idea that, I'm going to, go and create a school. I mean, I had taught at the other schools, but when people wanted to train here, then yes, created that. And I'm definitely feeling, I know because our school here is different than the other art school therapy schools in Canada and other places perhaps. I don't know them as much, but creating community and creating the school as a community, and having that ongoing sense of the community and the alumni being involved and the community and being responsive to community and to knowing what's happening in community, and then providing training or groups or workshops, is because that's what's happening. When we started to see a lot of bullying happening in the schools, we're hearing about it, and then you would come home one night talking about seeing some teen girls fighting on the street and this circle around, and people that were that it wasn't okay. And so then putting on a training event for counselors and teens and adults that were involved, hi, sweetie, you know, around bullying and the expressive arts and how we can address that. And so, yeah, that's just an ongoing piece of feeling like, yeah, responsive and caring about it.
I hear you. That's sort of the sense of making community.
Yes.
And yes, finding it, but growing it, or making a spot
Yeah.
for yourself in it.
Finding it, but growing it.
I remember
Being part of, yeah.
When we moved to Vancouver, when I was 12 or something, I remember going and checking out the downtown east side, and you guys
Yeah.
would bring us to events.
Yeah.
And we would see what was going on, you know, and that
Yeah.
was always interesting to see what was happening with the indigenous people or what was happening
Yeah.
with the, yeah. But I do feel that we're brought up in a tradition of sort of making those groups and those connections in a certain way. I realize that now at this house, I've turned it into a bit of a karaoke bar, you know, and so that then it's again about creating space for other people to come and join that group or to make that group stronger.
Yeah. But it's like family karaoke. It's not like
Yes.
you know, like the kids are just as, you know, outgoing about it. You know, they're amazing. Yeah. Little pups.
Ask about
Any opposition you may have faced when you came to Slocan Valley, that we've come across the Anglos, and also there are stories certainly about dealings with the Guinea Squad and FBI undercover agents, even looking at connections to militant people that may be trying to overthrow the American government or something like that.
No.
anything like that, and you're certainly not part of that.
No FBI, no militants, no political pieces like that. Not that I was aware of or exposed to or involved with. We were, when we were first here, in those early years, we were aware of there being some, you know, issues and animosity. You know, there were, you know, there was a man that used to go and, you know, stand on the side where he could see, you know, if there was nude swimming. There was, you know, I remember the summer that I was pregnant with Will, that a week before he was born, all the tires on our vehicles, we used to park our vehicles up at the top because we didn't have a driveway then. And yeah, if I'd had to get out at that time, there was nothing that was drivable. They had slashed all the tires. And, you know, the police did, they saw the tire tracks of who had been there, and they knew who it was. And they went and spoke to them. We never got any recompense or anything like that, but and we never got an apology, and we just fixed our tires and kind of went on. We just tried to keep on being kind of present and respectful in, you know, stores or in other places, and contribute in our way. And over the years have built many great, you know, connections and friendships, and yeah. So no, not not in the negative zone. That's wasn't our style. Yeah. Just as the whole, you know, all the, yeah, there were certain scenes, you know, I don't know how you would even put it. Yes, maybe more polyamorous, or people having lots of different affairs or doing that. You know, we were, even though we were seen as not being part of that.
Very loyal. One of my friends said, your parents were very loyal. I also remember a funny moment. I don't think, when I was a child, there weren't homeless people that we talked about in that way so much.
Oh, yeah.
But there were people that didn't have houses. You know, there was a guy that lived under a sheet of plywood about a mile down the road, and had a collection of junk and stuff, and he just lived under a tree and had cans of food and sort of cans of beer and things around there. And Blake, my dad, would stop in every now and then just to go see how he was doing. Partly to gain a gauge on just how wild the energy was under this piece of plywood in this little camp, and just go make sure it's okay and he's not getting wet, you know, and all his stuff is sort of dry and he's doing okay, and you go bring him a can of food or something and just go say hi. And that's because those are the people in your neighborhood.
Yeah.
But you know, he would have at that time just been camping out on who knows whose land, you know, somebody wasn't around or wasn't concerned, and he was just living there and would hitchhike to this little spot on the side of the road.
Yeah, there was another fellow that was at something we used to call the doll's house. It was kind of just a very tiny, small place, and yeah, he would arrive. I mean, he had mental illness and very severe paranoia, and he would arrive suddenly, and he was a fantastic musician. But yeah, I mean, Blake would take him home at a certain point and take food, give him money, etc. Yeah. You have to watch out for people.
And not everybody was welcome in the communes, you know, or felt comfortable. Yeah. So that it was sort of a thing of who was going to be welcomed or wanted there.
Who was going to take care of them.
Yeah.
All right. So, to ask about the Vallican Whole project here.
Yeah.
And what was your involvement with that project, and also do you think it brought the sort of counterculture community closer together?
Yeah, for sure.
And one question I'm trying to find out is who decided sort of, we had it Vallican Whole with HOLE, and then it became WHOLE. Who came up with that decision? Said, "Oh, let's just call it this."
I'm not exactly sure about that. I really am not.
They were teased about it.
Yes.
They were called, yes, and so but somebody embraced it.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I mean, I know who probably might know some of that stories there. The original name of the society's name, the what was it? Rural Alternatives Research and Training Society. I don't know for absolute sure, but it has the language of my father all over it. Like, that's kind of what he would have said, and I suspect that when they created a society, that was kind of his language, more than that would have been my mom's language or my, you know, or I'm not sure even actually who else was there who, in the first creating of the, of making a society and applying for a grant, and, you know, and I know that somebody, I'm not even sure who it was, but somebody anonymously donated the 10 acres. It may not be that anonymous anymore, and some people may know. I'm sure some do. But the land was donated, and then there was, you know, a grant written for digging the hole and being part of it. And that was a big, huge process because nobody really knew exactly, you know, how to do it, or they were learning how to do it, and all of that. And I would say, you know, I know that Blake went down and helped on that project some at that point. And then once we got to the next level with the more funds and grants and, you know, learning to build and, you know, everybody learning all those things, that's where I think Marcia got inspired with her carpentry and went on to become, you know, woman journeyman carpenter. But yeah, people were doing that. My mom was involved. You know, she used to sand the floors down there, and she used to sit on the door for events, and, you know, she was on the board. We used to be involved with the, you know, the school. I mean, you were part of the first group of students that were actually in the building when we were in the building. And so your name was on the hook, you know, for years there. You know, Blake made various, parts of the furniture that's still out there, benches that are there. So, we would go to events. When you're in a community and sort of music would happen or social things would happen, there's a sense of that, just that you need to, you both want to go out to things, but also you have a responsibility if you want these kind of things to continue to support what's happening and what people are doing. And that's something that I know that for years, and I still do, I feel that responsibility around support. Hi, everybody. Coming and talking about things. So, yeah. So I'm not sure, but it's the kind of thing that we would have all been talking and joking about going from the Hole. Once the Hole was an actual place. Well, we'd been so. Are you going down to the Hole? We kind of just kept saying that, and it slid into that, and that was into the Hole. Well, it's going to be a hole, and it was fabulous, because prior to that, when events were happening, and certainly some events would happen, at the Little Red Schoolhouse or at the Passmore Lodge, Passmore Hall or Winlaw Hall, but they had their own societies, the Doukhobor societies, or their own community, and while they would rent it out, they weren't always that happy about doing that, and you couldn't always. Yeah. So having one's own space was fabulous, and, taking care of it and having, a place for weddings and funerals and performances and the school. And I was, actually teaching there for 2.5 years during some of its early days there. And we used to have to close up the school like every weekend, or we'd have our books and our teaching materials, they were all on movable dividers that you'd pull things out and put it back, and then and so it was really embedded at that point in the community, and for absolute sure that brought this community together. It was a place to go, to be, to do. We were, yeah.
I think it was almost like the town hall. It was also a place for fundraisers.
Yeah.
In that sense that if somebody's house burned down, you needed to have a dance, and people would do that, and then you could build a new house, and then it was actually sort of a part of an asset. It was an essential tool for this community to be able to move forward and to, to honor its dead and to do its own weddings, and
Yeah.
it was interesting. Your mother was at one point, I think, somebody else in the community who was making a negative joke about it and was not happy about a group of people that he saw as being too powerful. The libertarian person who, was a little bit intimidated by the creation of community and the power that a small group of people was having when they created the cemetery and stream keepers and were doing all of these things and putting politicians in, and they called them the Slocan Valley Mafia. And he was sort of like, and he was referring to your mother and a few of these other women strong women who wrote grants and got stuff done. And he was sort of saying, it was like, wow, this is the Slocan Valley Mafia, because you couldn't do anything without talking to those people. And again, they almost, like, I don't totally know if they embraced it officially, but it was sort of known that if you wanted to get something done, there was a few people you should go talk to, because they know all of the issues. They know all of the history. They know the problems. They know how it was done last time. And so it was sort of, but some people would keep bumping their head against the wall when they were trying to skip out people in the loop, and then you'd sort of get in trouble of like, well, you didn't go and ask so-and-so. You didn't talk to this person.
Well, that's how it is in communities. You have that place, and the truth is that they would do the work, and that if it was something that needed to happen or could happen or they wanted help with, somebody would be there and do that. And I mean, there's and some people probably were not as they were very strong-minded, and that it might have been a little challenging, and I wouldn't have said that my mom was one of those. She was a more, I don't know, hardworking and more soft-spoken around it, but she certainly, yeah, was very community. Yeah.
A ringleader of those people, I think, is what it is. They all came to her for support.
It's true. It's true. Yeah. Yeah.
So, Monica, you were saying you were teaching at the school there.
Yeah.
And what sort of curriculum was being taught, and how would it sort of differ from more of a conventional school, I suppose, mainstream school? What were the differences that you think there was going on at the Vallican Whole School there?
Well, we were teaching in groups, so that you'd have like the younger kids, the middle, and then the older. So you had it was a multi-year kind of system. My style of teaching was definitely focused on centers and thematics. Art was definitely always really embedded in it, but I love literature and writing and words and math and science, and we had different people, like Joanne Ellis that was there, and she is nuts about bugs, insects, so lots of great science pieces that would happen. But I did centers. I built, created different centers when they did the archaeological dig on the Sinaiacs place there before. So we did a whole Indigenous focus and basket making. We went there and, we had a whole focus there. I did a whole focus on endangered species, did a whole focus on hunger in the world, disability awareness. I think we wrote a play there around disability awareness and performed that there. So there were these different focuses that I would then bring, everything together under that focus. But it's, part of what happened for me with teaching there was that I would see when there was emotional issues that were coming up and what was being expressed in individuals' art. And that kind of led me on to wanting to train as an art therapist. In particular, a young boy whose mother had died, and he had painted this incredible painting of a house, and then I watched as he, with the paint, basically burnt the house down, and it hit me, like what was happening, and I didn't know at that point, what to do or how to support him. But I realized that for myself, I didn't, I could do the classroom management and teach all these different things here, but I actually wanted to be able to pay attention to those particular kinds of needs in kids, and started to look for where to go to train. Yeah.
It was also neat at the Hole in those days, at the Vallican Hole. I feel like all the parents would come in and that everybody had to pay or contribute in some way. And so some people would bring firewood and some people would do different things. And Monica was teaching. And so there's different ways that the education got paid for. But that it also meant that all of the parents that had skills and had interest in that would come in and do bits.
Yes.
And so that there was sort of a really wide diversity of different things that would happen because of that. And we sort of had really an enriched sense of learning. Like it felt like, the basics were sort of there, but more we had an enriched learning environment.
Yeah.
I don't know. It wasn't, I don't know, it was maybe sheltered a little bit from really traditional education, but it felt very much like a special thing that we were a part of.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was there opposition from other schools about the practices that were going on at the Vallican Hall? Do you remember school district, or was it were they just happy to?
I mean, there was questions raised at certain point, but then when it was, it would come, and when we did get independent school funding, and they would come and assess what was happening, they were incredibly impressed with the quality of what was being taught and learned doing there, and by and large, kids that would transition back into the schools, would do well. There were always, maybe grammar and spelling wasn't as high on the list there of what was being in curriculum, and there were some challenges, so, but, yeah, I mean, there were, I actually still have sort of, newsletters and art projects and books from those days. Actually, I could pull out some of those things. I was, but and some of the philosophy and how we were thinking about it, and it was run by the parents, and so that then trusted the teachers to do a good job, and things would come back, and there were some challenges. There's no doubt about it. And over the years it evolved along in different ways, and one of the challenges was definitely what I spoke about at the beginning, that place of having to, of it being a community center and a school being there, but being part of that from the early years, we felt that privilege of being able to use this space. And there was always the idea that one would eventually need to have a separate school space. And so that, the points when, the school didn't want to have to close up all the time and be, weren't as maybe community concerned about that, and there was more division, that became a bit of a challenge, and, eventually a bit of a divide, and the community center needed to be able to be used as a community center, because everyone who had built and contributed to it, that was the intention there. And because it was really very similar in some sense to the creation of the cemetery society, that prior to creating our own cemetery, when somebody passed, or a child passed, or someone died, or we would have to go to ask the Doukhobors, could we, bury in their cemetery, and they were very gracious, and around that, but also clear, quite rightly so, that they had small areas for their cemetery, and you need to put this together for yourselves, so that you're, this is an important part of community and doing that. And so, so that's what people started to do. And, there was land that was, donated and figured out how to do that, and lots of learning about what was required to create a cemetery. And we did. We'll show it to you later.
I think I just want to add, I feel like there was little bits of teasing from the kids, at Win-Law School or something, or when you left.
It's baseball, maybe.
When you left the Vallican Whole, it was definitely seen as a bit of an odd scene by the other children.
Yes.
And so that they would explain to you about what a crazy hippie school you were going to. Maybe with a little bit of jealousy, because we went 4 days a week, and we had no bells, and we went camping, and we got out a month early in summertime, and there was a lot of things that felt unfair to, I think, other kids in the neighborhood. And I think when I left that school in the mid-1980s, there was another movement as well, whereas the early 80s, the late 70s, I think people felt a little unsafe at some of the public schools, and so that there was some of the sense that the hippie kids were going to get beat up or harassed at school. And by the mid-80s, I think that was starting to be seen as something that people wanted to address in a different way. And I feel like there was, again, that slight split between the community, the back to the land communities around here. And a lot of them, some of them were still wanting to isolate, but in a more isolationist way of like, not quite as enriched learning outside of the school, a little bit more just isolated from society, more like what was not going to be taught than what was going to be taught. Like, I want my kids to go to this school because they're not going to be taught these things. Whereas when in the early days, it was more about what you wanted. And I think at that point as well, a lot of people started really wanting to, just the way you're talking about wanting to give back to the healing to the community, people wanted to improve the public school systems. And so there was a bunch of people that had been at the Vallican Whole that suddenly their kids were sort of aging out of it and they were ready to go back to public, and they were like, we need to go into the public school system. We need to save everybody. We can't just protect our children. We have to actually protect the children they're interacting with. You know, that it's not enough to school your children in how to be pacifists and how to do this. We actually needed to branch out and go to and so that there became quite a movement, and quite a few people, you know, left the private school and sort of were very much, it has to be public now. And sort of made that transition. I know Joanne was one of those people.
Yes.
It was sort of very much, you know, needed to do things for all of the kids.
Yes.
Seeing the other little redneck kids around the neighborhood and being like, yeah, we need to do art for you guys too, and we need to do this. And it's,
well, and I think also people from our community looking for, you know, work or being involved wanted to, you know, were training to be teachers and look for jobs. And so there were people that we knew that were teaching in the schools then and doing that. And we have that even more now. Yeah. Yeah.
And well, looking back, what was your favourite thing about attending the Vallican Whole School there?
I felt special, I think, as a child. I think I felt, I might have to respond to the dogs in the neighborhood. But yeah, no, I think I felt special as a child, like, and I think that stuck with me, where I felt like I could learn anything and I felt valuable and yeah, like a part of the community. We went on camping trips, we had dances, we cleaned up, we sort of organized, we had an important role in facilitating these things. Like, I felt like I got to have, you know, we had these big parties at our school. You know, we had, so I think that just sort of, there was some sort of magical sense of just being believed in and believing that you could learn anything. And that I was taught those things early on, and then was sort of later on taught that I was dyslexic and had all kinds of learning disabilities for a period of time, and then was taught that that wasn't a problem again, and that I should just get help if I ever ran into that. So there was sort of some real curves in my education, and a moment in the middle where I was told that I was actually really inadequate and not smart enough. And it was just interesting because I didn't really listen or pay attention to that because I'd already been educated that I was smart enough. And so that when I ran into those issues, it was, anyway, I didn't quite know how to respond. I sort of shut it out a bit. But I think there was something instilled in me, just a sort of an interesting belief about the world and the way we could be in it, and the way we belonged in the world. That's still stuck with me, and that I take now into my environmental eds stuff, and that sort of idea that we need to have a grounding, a confidence in ourselves, in our ability to interact in ways, you know, and that was my sense that I should be able to interact in society and have a place in the community. Yeah, I think kids, you know, we had meetings, we had,
you were part of the
sense
meetings
that everybody
and
was a
decisions.
part of it, you know, that it was a communal organization.
Well, and it was. I mean, I remember your teacher in grade 12 there saying to me, he said, I have never had a student, this was his English teacher, who had such serious, you know, English and writing dyslexic issues, that didn't have his sense of self and self-esteem completely destroyed by this time, you know, that he was still planning to go on to university and do that, you know. Nobody else would have dreamt of doing that.
And I think he told me, and I've been told initially that I should go into remedial English and wouldn't pass the English 12 exam. And I remember him telling me, he was just like, well, you're going to be a special case. You either just write it, don't worry about it at all. It's like, if you do okay and you get a B or something, that's it. We're just good. We're happy. And he was like, you can't expect them to be perfect. He's like, but I will ask for a rewrite if you don't do that well, or something. And he was just sort of like, because that can happen. It's like you could just run into the wrong person and they're just going to give you a marginal pass or a non-pass. And he's like, we'll ask for the rewrite. It'll be fine.
Okay, and so I'm going to move on a little bit. Here we go. So we tell us about the importance of the Rural Alternatives Research and Training Society and the role it plays today.
Uh-oh.
You want to go for that? Or
That me? I'm on the board with RARTS. And so, today it's, balancing efforts. It's a lot of volunteer efforts still required to keep it going. There's a paid administrator. There's a caretaker that gets paid to look after a bunch of stuff around the building. It's rented out for many weddings and special events. We're looking at finding ways that we need to keep a few key weekends open for dances and more broad community events every year, because weddings can potentially get booked years in advance at this point as being one of the cheapest and most versatile wedding venues in the area. There's a kitchen, there's dishes, you can seat over 100 people. It's got a beautiful dance floor. It's situated in the...
yeah, it's beautiful.
And so that when you look at other places that you could rent or halls, that it's different and it's a magical place. And so we have, there was an up-close, intimate series that happened this fall, with plays and musical events. There was a musical thing that happened this last weekend. So it's, I feel like there's room for more, but we need to protect our volunteers a little bit. And so we're trying not to, organize too many things that we can't handle. We also don't want to, it's always difficult with pricing on different events. We don't want to be diluting the quality of our entertainment by being open to all kinds of things. So we sort of have to pick and choose a little bit. But anytime, that there's a wake or somebody is passed, there'll be one coming up just recently, and the hall can be rented for very cheap for that kind of event. And looks really beautiful and can fit a large number of people.
Yeah.
Different things with sound equipment, and there's we've upgraded. We just got a huge grant and upgraded it as a resiliency center, and so it's got a generator in the back that runs on propane and is set to switch over to that. And there's some first aid equipment, an AED. Equipment, as people, the aging community.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we've got some food resources that would go into there as well, so that if we have evacuation orders or different things in this area, that is actually in a slightly different area off of the river in different bits. And so so it could become a place that we would hang out. There's an old building there that's not suitable for living anymore. That's a smoke center, a smoke training center for the local fire department that we're allowing them to use to do smoke training, because there's no other place like that where they can have firsthand experience of walking into a smoky building with equipment and stuff like that. And so there's, we're always trying to look at our mandate and see what it is we can do and maintain open to that. There's theater group that's using it and trying to do that, and there's a sculpture walk that was started at one point when we were both on the board together.
We created an eco sculpture park, and we had a sculpture symposium and had some land-based art being made. We've also had some pieces that have been, placed there, like for both naive folk art as well as fine art from artists local in the area. It was part of, a desire to sort of create a legacy place for sculptures around. We've got, a bench in there, and it's been, it needs a little more work again to do that, but we've made some, land-based art in the space. And I've used the whole rented for, for the Art Therapy Institute when we were in transition from one building, and our new space was unfortunately not available when we needed it. We had several months where we came out and use the school, the Art Therapy Institute out there, and then we also have done symposiums and conferences and workshops. It's a fabulous space to go and for education and experience. Yeah.
It's great, fantastic. Can you tell us about the foundation and the story of the Dumont Creek Society? Burial Society there.
Going back and forth. The foundation, who donated? Is that Jenny's land?
I think it was land just behind a friend,
No,
Jenny
it was
Ash's, and they were doing a bit of logging on the back of Jenny's land, and they noticed this beautiful sand in this little area behind there, and I believe it was owned by RDCK, and so they just put a request in on that.
Yes.
And
Right.
we're allowed to use it for a period of time. And then at some point we've now actually purchased it for $1 off of the RDCK because they didn't want to maintain us under their insurance anymore. And so they would sell it to us for $1 if we purchased our own insurance, which I think covers us in case we lose a body in the cemetery, which is sort of odd because it's not that big a cemetery and it's fairly easy to keep track of. Those are some of the mistakes that you can make if you put somebody in and now you've confused it anyway. There could be a lawsuit or something. So we carry some liability insurance for that. But it was, the Doukhobors recommended that we did this because, and I was a child, 5 years old at this point, so I don't totally remember firsthand, but that there was, a few deaths and a few tragic things that happened early on, and it's really hard to say no to anybody when they've passed and you have a spot, and so the arrangements got made and a few people were buried in the cemeteries, and then they just sort of said, you really need to get your own cemetery, and so we did. Found this piece of sand up at the top of what would have been Lebedeau Lake, potentially 10,000 years ago. We're at the bottom end of it right now, and you go 5 miles up, you'd be at the top end of that lake. And so there's all sand and clay in there. We dig all the graves by hand. It makes it actually manageable. And we had to put a road in at one point, so we did a bit of logging behind it to expand the clearing and do that. And now we're at the stage of almost having to do what the Doukhobors were doing to us, of explaining to other people that we can't actually bury everybody who wants, because a lot of places, now that it's legal to have a shroud burial in BC, it still requires the cemetery having a bit of a process around that and understanding how they're going to deal with that. And we're one of the only cemeteries in this area that's figured that out. And so we have a lot of people coming, wanting a shroud burial or wanting to use the cemetery in different ways. And at this point, we'll say no sometimes in the winter time, or we'll say no when it feels too taxing for our members.
But you don't ever say no if it's somebody that's from community.
Yes, and so we allow, but for me, our mandate officially is to actually allow people to do their own burials, and to with the help and support of community, and that we would support people doing digging their own grave, running their own ceremony, lowering the body. We've got equipment for that. So that's all. And it's sort of, in some sense, now we're trying to teach other people from other communities how it is that we did this, how the cemetery was formed, how you can ask for a piece of land, you can form a board, and purchase insurance, create membership fees, different things like that. the membership fees that we have actually is sort of more about pride in being a part, you know, and voting for who's going to be on the board and doing cleanup and maintaining the cemetery and deciding what kind of artwork or expansions should be done. Anybody can be buried there. We have a preference for people from our local area, Area H, where we will try to serve them always, and people who've been involved in the cemetery in the past. But it's interesting representing a really great idea and then also having to recognize the limits of how you can provide for everybody, but also recognize that you don't actually want to present those limits. You sort of want to educate people to understand the limits so that other alternatives can be created. You know, so
But we've been involved right from the beginning. My mom was on the first creating of the society and being part of that, and then I don't know, probably the treasurer for ages and doing that, and then after she died, you went on the board.
So 18 years or something now.
Yeah, exactly. And now you're the chief grave digger and responsible.
I supervise the digging of graves.
Yes.
And there was a moment at which we were allowed to dig 6 feet down, and then there was a moment at which it became a liability to dig over 6 feet without cribbing, and partly because we learned about this, and even though we have very special digging conditions. So we sort of developed a system of giving a safety meeting and discussing the issues and the concerns and allowing people to take responsibility for the risks of digging their own grave, and have sort of allowed ourselves to protect that as a special thing that we do, because a lot of places they won't let you dig a grave.
Well, and so you dig the grave, bury the body, you have create your own funeral ceremony, and then you also fill in the grave. And that's, you know, that's a whole part of the whole process, which is something that doesn't happen at other cemeteries. You will leave after, and even sometimes the body isn't necessarily lowered. Sometimes it is and sometimes not when I've been there, but for us, it's the whole process. It's from the beginning till the end, and it's a very profound, process. Very, very profound, and you know, people are involved, and there's different ways that ceremony happens. And,
A non-emergency, normal thing that happens. You know, death happens all the time, and if we treat it always like an emergency and we need to hire officials to protect us from the smell of a body or the different things, then, you know, this is part of that back to the land sense. Then we're not looking after ourselves. Then we're not actually completing the cycle.
as part of a community. It's very much, it's become more and more central part of the community, and that's something that, you know, I don't know, in the beginning it was sort of there, you know, and certainly my mom was one of the older people that were involved, and now you've had quite a few of the older people that have been on your board for a long time, and you're looking forward to having some younger people that are, you know, now buried their parents in the cemetery and starting to realize just how important it is to have a place. It is an incredibly beautiful cemetery. You'll see. It's really, but it's very central. It's a very important place to complete that cycle. And certainly during the pandemic, you know, it wasn't necessarily pandemic caused past deaths, but that was, I would say for myself, the biggest social occasions during those years, coming out to a burial, and, you know, people that we knew had died. And
Phoebe's about to hunt my chicken.
oh, Phoebe, come here. Hey, Phoebe, forget it. Sorry.
I remember
We've got
last year.
chickens and dogs here, but no, she was just thinking about it, wondering. But you know, this is Wilt's
She
chickens.
was about to go.
You're not allowed to do that.
2 years ago, we had an interesting one with Jenny Ash, whose
Oh, yes.
house is in front of the cemetery, and so for years people walked through her yard to get to the cemetery when we
Yes.
buried my father and different things. And then she passed away at home and got to spend, you know, the 3 days at home. And then we carried her, no vehicles, She never went to town, right up to the cemetery and buried her in her backyard. And
Yes.
and that was interesting.
And she had gone up with you, I think, what, a week or two before, and you had decided she knew where she was going to get buried.
Yes,
She
well,
had a
she'd asked
spot
about
out
it.
there. She'd asked where it could be, and I mean that's one of the things that I'm incredibly impressed with, Will, that you always have been able to create and have people be buried where in the cemetery feels, honoring and right for them, and where they need to be in relationship to other people. You've been doing it now for a long time, and it's very, very meaningful. Yeah.
All right. So, and how do you think sort of counterculture movement has affected people's attitudes towards the environment? And do you think the movement has helped change people's attitudes and consciousness related to protecting our environment in the Kootenays?
Absolutely. And I think it's part of that, this is our land, and that same sense of taking responsibility, and no, we don't want to see it being ill-treated or logged off, or, whether it's whichever culture is trying to do that. It's very, and people are willing to, organize around it, very, very concerned, around the water. When there was the oil spill up at Lemon Creek, it's, and there was oil, and the river needed to be cleaned. Sorry, Phoebe, just here, come here. That's not for you to do anything, just come and sit. Sorry, I'm not sure where I got lost track on that.
The environmental.
Do you want? Maybe you have some thoughts. Yeah, the oil spill. Oh yes. Well, you were worked on on that, cleaning up and hazardous, matters. And
I think, for me, one of the things that's really key in developing future environmentalism is sort of doing initial activities. And so the people who went to protests as a child with their families, I think still know and still hold that. Some of the ones that didn't as much, and I sort of even notice it's some of the bits where I feel like my father would have been really keen on me getting a university education, and at moments I've sort of gone, oh, it was very expensive and took a lot of time. Some of those things I think are big factors in becoming really active as an environmentalist. And so I noticed some of the people that didn't do as much university or didn't have as much firsthand experience going to protests. We went to the Peace March every year in Vancouver. We went to all kinds of protests, and these kinds of levels of demonstrated commitment and done as a whole family are really powerful. And so I think people that were involved in that, a community that supported that and was active in those ways, have definitely maintained that energy. I have a few friends that I consider sort of redneck hippies who go logging and are proud to cut down really big trees. And they still claim they love them more than anybody else, but it's still just, there can be awkward transitions. Not everybody feels empowered enough to make changes in the world. Some people are just empowered to just be there. So, that's what I think of some of these people. These are probably people that didn't have the university education, but have years and years of skills in the backcountry and are sort of proud of that and recognize the world's changing and are probably sad about it too, but they're sad about it because they can no longer go and cut those big trees down because there just aren't enough of them. And so it's interesting, it's always complex. I'm not saying it's not a perfect equation. I had an argument with somebody recently who was telling me that she used to believe all kinds of things, now doesn't believe anything, doesn't understand, and so that there's a sense that we can, as teenagers, be idealists and then come to realize that we don't even know if climate change is real later on. And so, but these are these are risks that happen, I think, through through society, through pandemics, through crisis, through education or non-education.
I think that's, yeah, it is, it's true. I think and it's a fundamental question that I find myself continually asking, like with the passing of my mother and my partner, my aunt, like the whole question of losing the planet because of what's happening in terms of, the climate crisis and the, environmental emergency. So you start to think even more, like we've always been involved, but and that there really is what's needed is an internal shift. Not we know what needs to happen. The question is, why are we not doing it? When we can stop everything when there's a pandemic, why are we not still taking it as seriously instead of thinking about, what it's going to be like for your children, our children, the next 30, 50 years? How is that? Why are we not planning for the next number of generations? And so that for me, everything that I started to do in teaching, even around, art therapy, became, looked at in terms of an ecological identity lens. And that was part and parcel with Will doing his, master's in environmental studies, and his thesis is on the development of an ecological identity, which is really based on growing up, being born here on this land, growing up on this land, and how do you, live and work with all the environmental issues that are there. And so,
Sometimes
you're right.
Talking to puppies,
Yes.
and talking to trees, and having
Yeah.
little conversations with things. Yeah.
No, that's good. That's good. That's definitely how you do it. But that's an ongoing huge part of our dialogue. But is that true for everyone out in the community in the valley? Certainly there are people that for yes it is, and other people who, because we live in one of the most beautiful places in the world, and it doesn't seem like so threatened. We're not living in a devastated or immediately threatened area. It's not, so when that oil spill happened and people were evacuated and kids were scared, and, we were doing some programming in the schools after that, and nobody had stopped to really talk to the kids about what that was like for them when, they're being evacuated and the water is dirty and all of that. And Will was doing some groups in the schools, and he went in. You always dress up in different ways, and you'd gone in your hazmat suit, and they said, "Oh, we'd seen you in the river, cleaning up the river," and and how do you how does that happen? So, yeah, I mean, for us, it's definitely been, again, that's probably coming back to community, and the community is our environment, and after the first few days of the horror of, what had happened to a pristine, clean river, got in the river and started cleaning up, with, working for the company that was doing it. So, yeah, it's important. It's very important.
Okay. I feel we're talking a bit about this, but what do you think is the legacy of the alternative school movement in education generally today in the Kootenays?
Well, I would like to start prefacing that with the legacy of the alternative school movement. Like when I was a teenager in Vancouver, and we had started the No Place, the alternative school there, and several of us were being asked to go in. We would to the school board office and talk about what we wanted different and what we needed in terms of schools. And after that period of time, the schools started creating the mini schools. And there are a number of, mini schools through the adolescent programs in through Vancouver. And there was Ideal School, and there was the Kwatla-Trek program, and there was another arts program. There were different specialty mini schools. And I think that same sort of thing started to happen here. There was the Vallican Whole, but within the schools they started paying more attention. They realized they weren't going to get the students coming if they didn't have the kind of programming that people really wanted. And you have the program up at W.E. Graham, the Wilderness Program. The teacher there has just won an award for the quality of what they're doing up there. Mount Sentinel had a program. Can't remember what that one's called right now. They also have a terrific theater program down there with Martina Avis. And they had Heather Shippett before that. They've had, a series of great theater people down there. LVR has had, specialty aspects in those programs. And I think, unfortunately, our middle school in Nelson hasn't done the same thing. You maybe get some of that with the French program, but I think that's something that we need way more of. Both environmental programs, arts-based programs, dance programs, different things like that, and not trying to do the same for everybody, but have these places where kids can go and really learn and be more, focused. Yeah.
Some choices, yeah.
Choices,
Some
yeah.
choices, no, and I think it is just that some choices, and then there's a lot of welcoming people back traditions as well of I think, so to help people finish, because there's
Yes.
that's more in Nelson,
Yes.
and you would know more about that, but because I think a lot of kids would drop out at a certain point and then need to be sort of welcomed back, or find a different way at a year or two older or more mature level to realize, and a lot of people just need to be supported. They actually need to just get out of a bullying, rough, not appreciative situation, and then they need to go somewhere else. For me, it was always important just to have a choice. So just that idea of a choice is powerful. You're in a class, it's horrible, you hate it, you can't deal with the teacher. You just have to have a choice for something else.
Yes.
Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work out great, but the idea that you have no choice is like a prison. It's like you're stuck in. And so I feel it's now understood that that's not a healthy situation for a kid not to have a choice. And if you need an alternative, that's considered much more acceptable, even if you just need to be homeschooled for a year or something. I think there's some interesting alternatives around here. I've seen somebody who runs a bus up and down the Arrow Lakes, and he's running this as enrichment for people who homeschool. So he wants to do 1 or 2 days a week enrichment programming. You get on the bus, you go do special activities, and he's sort of rounding up all the homeschooling kids to go give a special day. And it was wow, that sounds great. What a neat thing. These are the kind of things that I would love to get to teach that as well. Run an environmental education day or, anyway, it's neat.
Yeah.
I like to think about I hear stories though about Japan, where kids learn how to clean the school. And that's the thing, and it's just actually doing work all day and what that does for society. There's this whole building, and we're maintaining this. I have a friend in Denmark who says, the kids at the end of the year, they design this, what's going to happen for the kids next year. They reprogram for for the year that they've just completed what the kids next year should be doing. They plan all the lunches. They get in there, everybody, different groups have got who's making the lunch today. And it's just wow, such basic things that actually this is what I'd like to see more of. So we're just at the doorstep, but I still think we take the kids, put them in a room, want to sanitize them, laugh at the people who do the janitorial work, get to eat, drink out of juice boxes, and it's all this crap and waste and endless. Anyway, that's my little bit. But
we'd like to see.
We'd
it.
actually like to see the schools should do their own stuff. They should look after their own business. They should manage the coursework. They should make food. They should clean the building. They should do repairs. You know, this is the basic stuff that we all came out here to live about, learn about. Why can't they do some of that in schools? Is it, you know, we're actually protecting the kids in the school from touching real tools, from having real problems, from having real meetings with each other. You know, whereas actually kids want to do the learning. They want to talk. They want to plan the school. They know about these things. They're right there. You know, they totally
Yes.
know. And, you know, I mean, I think this is still we end up with problems now happening with kids wanting to talk about transgender issues and different things, and everybody's, oh no, that's too much. We don't want to talk about that. You know, and it's, again, we want to teach the kids. We don't want to include the kids in their own education. Kids are born, and like adolescence is a time where kids are born to challenge the system. And they're born to challenge the system that they're raised in. And that challenge is important. We can't ignore it. We ignore the challenge from children, we end up with this kind of societal problem. You know, we end up with old people retiring, you know, like our Premier of BC who got a job greenwashing for the coal company. You know, for me, he turned the NDP into a non-environmental party and then got a job over representing coal companies. And this is what happens. And I thought he was retiring because he had cancer and was, you know, old in life. And but it turns out he's still got a bunch of money to make. So. Anyway, different stories.
Yeah.
I got this huge pile of puppies underneath me. Yeah, it's pretty good.
I'm passionate about the whole idea of schools. You know, schools should have their own gardens, and there are around, you know, in different places on Turtle Island, there are people that are doing different kinds of educational systems, and I think that's super important. And I would really like to see, you know, the eco-literacy, the arts and the eco-literacy be absolutely embedded in all the schools. I think it's super important. I mean, if we're going to save the planet, that's what we have to do. And so that's what I'm writing about these days.
And the kids want to learn that. They actually
they
all
do.
want tangible stuff. They want to learn about things. It's not a...
Yeah. Sorry, so what? People?
No.
No, oh, puppies. We're okay.
Great. All right, it's fantastic. Are there any other effects about from the counterculture movement that you see in the Kootenays today that we haven't talked about? Have we covered it all?
You know, lots of the arts for me. It's like this area has a thriving artistic community, and you know, and that's what it is. The idea that we're not here to consume and make money.
Yeah.
And there's actually something else and we have been talking about it, but it's about community and making art, and exploring how we're connected to each other, to the land, to all of those things.
The interrelatedness of it, like that's, you know, like that's what we need in terms of the environmental movement, but it is also very much what we need in terms of any community social justice movement, is that we are all connected, and we have to, you know, be part of that whole cycle, and we need to do that, and we need to do that from birth to death. I mean, you know, everything has changed. You know, when I would have done a hospital birth if they weren't going to take my baby away for the first 24 hours in New Denver. And when I realized that, it was like, I'm not doing that. That's not what's feels right. And now we have, you know, in Nelson, there's a terrific, you know, team up there on the maternity ward, and, you know, great maternity nurses and doctors who support, you know, home births or like midwives coming in. You know, a lot of things have changed, and it changes you do things on the outside, but it changes things on the inside. And I think there's just a lot more of that happening. And yeah.
The organisations, the Kootenay Co-op, things like that, which have certainly got relationships there, I think, to the movement.
Yes.
And yeah, the anti-materialism seems to be quite a theme with getting some people
Yes, yes. Non-consumerism, non-materialism, money not being so important. And it must seem like that. It's funny, you know, everything you mentioned like that, like Kootenay Co-op. Well, that was out here in the beginning. We group buying, and my mom was involved in that. We were doing some of that, you know, like, and that eventually became the Kootenay Co-op, you know. But it was, yeah, group buying. Sorry,
Also,
I'm going to have to. Phoebe,
believing,
forget it.
believing that we can do anything, and sort of that aesthetic choosing of what kind of society we want to live in. For me, those are empowering things that live on around here. Because I do believe we're still sort of trying to choose, you know, what kind of world we can live in, and the idea that I sort of feel like there's this pressing in from the outside, this idea that we can't choose. No, it has to be like this. The economy says it has to be like this. It has to be like, and no, it doesn't. You know, there's actually lots of economies. There's lots of ways it can go, and and those are some of the things, like that creative thinking, the out-of-box thinking, the sort of the sense that we can change and influence the world around us. For me, that's what's really significant, and that sort of allows people to be artists. It's the courage to be an artist. It's the courage to call what you do art. It's the courage to think there should be more art, or, you know, to think that this should be more beautiful, and that business should be more inspirational and supportive, or, you know, anyway, that idea that we can all just do a little better, and why not? You know, why not? Wouldn't it be better? Couldn't we make this more exciting? Don't we like the good things, you know?
Yeah, just emphasizing that point of being responsive and responsible to community. It's not someone else that's going to do it. You can't count on someone else doing it. You really have to do it yourself, and do it together with other people. But yeah, don't give it away.
Make the world that you want.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I've got one more question really here. How do you think being part of the counterculture movement has affected your life?
Making a life. Actually, just really that place of actually feeling like what I was saying there about, you know, this is that what you value, what you believe, how you live your life, what you do, is important and makes a difference. And you need to do that with the honor and the respect, the intensity that you want to see happen in life. And so when I see things that need to be done, then I will, you know, move and step in and put energy towards what needs to happen or change, whether that's personally or in family or in community. And, you know, that's led for me in terms of my work to, you know, training as an art therapist, creating an art therapy school, designing art therapy programs, you know, doing that nationally, doing it internationally, and, you know, believing that we can make a difference, and that, you know, telling the stories of difference makes also a difference. So that, yeah, and I, you know, I feel like I grew up here, you know, came here as a teenager and kind of learned and grew up in this valley, on this land, in this community. And has it changed me? Yeah, I think it's changed me. I don't know how. For you, it's been your whole life.
It's been my whole life, yeah. I think it's a little bit of courage to, you know, I feel like there's been points when I was working at a mill at one point, and I remember when I quit after a year and sort of claimed that was my education there, and I've enjoyed my time but needed to move on. And a few people were just shocked and surprised, and they couldn't believe that I was just going on to something else, or that I, didn't know. But I realized that courage is something that I've gained. That sort of sense that I can do anything, and that it's not, that my life isn't about doing necessarily just anything. It's about finding that anything that's for me. I don't know. A little courage to take big risks, courage to not know what's coming next. I feel that that's actually takes quite a bit of bravery, and I've been unemployed many moments in my life, and I realize a lot of my friends are not, are actually too afraid or vulnerable to do that. And that sometimes I wonder why, and I get upset at myself, and I think this is really hard, and why am I in this place again and struggling in this way? And then I realize it's like, oh, it's because I'm actually very brave, and I really feel like there's something important and magical for me to be doing. Sometimes that's meetings like this, that this is the work we do, this is the work I do. And it's, partly whatever you find important. We're all gonna die, and we're gonna be left with our projects, and the things that we did, and and what people think about us. So, yeah, it seems really key to being who I am. It's that sort of sense of figuring out, who you want to be. Counterculture is a big part of that, I guess. Creating our own culture. I do believe a lot in creating your own culture. So when I grew up in a meaningful culture that was powerful and rich, I sort of have to contribute to that and create my own group and my own culture. It's a power. It's a power that I think I was educated with. That it was like we can do this. We can create our own reality. And so once you've learned that, it's hard to go back.
Okay, well, I think we'll leave it there.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.